Welcome to Aired Out, brought to you by Capitol Showplace Montpelier and Paramount Theater Barrie. At FGBtheaters.com, CW Print and Design in Barrie, at CWPrintDesign.com, Peak Entertainment, PeakDJ.com, Cruise Planners, your land and cruise experts. In Vermont, CruisePlanners.com, Donnybrook Fight Promotions of Williamstown, CBDCrave.com. Presented by CVTV, Public Access Channel 192 and 194, CVTV723.org, Fontaine, Forestry, and Millworks, Route 14 East Montpelier. Custom orders, rough, kiln dry, plain, tongue and groove, or shiplap. FontaineMillworks.com and Fly on the Wall Productions. Now, let's get aired out.
It's a Friday night. You've got Aired Out. I'm J.D. Green. A special guest back in the studio with me tonight is the editor of the Times-Argus and Rutland Herald, Steve Pappas. Welcome, sir. I can't believe you're back here. This is amazing. Tony Campos literally almost tried to throw you in the dumpster last time you were here. And that was one hell of a show.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean,
dropping F-bombs and oh, my God.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, welcome. Yeah, you forgot.
I won't do that.
Yeah, good.
So,
welcome back.
It's good to be here. It's
Aired
always
Out.
It's good to see you because you and I always have good conversations. And,
yeah, we do.
Yeah. I mean, we're kind of cut from the same cloth.
And here's the thing, I had written in my calendar today that you and I were going to go out for a bite to eat and a cold beer or two, possibly three, after tonight's podcast. Not going to be able to do it because I've got a little girl that needs some medical attention.
Yeah, well,
so
I will hold you to the beer quota for another time.
You've been holding that for like 5 years. We've been trying to.
It's true since your Froggy days.
Oh my God,
it's true.
So,
but it's good to see you.
It's great to see you too, man.
Yeah.
So,
sorry to hear about your daughter. Hope she's okay.
Oh yeah, she's going to be just fine. Man, we have a lot to get to. This has been an interesting week, as you know. I'm hanging up the hat in radio.
Yeah, how do you feel about that?
Well, I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. In one way, I'm very excited to be beginning some different endeavors, and of course, this podcast is one of them. But very bittersweet. I was just on the phone with Devin Fox from Work FM, who now it doesn't live in Vermont anymore, and we just had so many laughs for like an hour, just chatting with him and remembering old times in radio. It's radio's changed an awful lot, though.
Yeah,
it's changed a lot, and folks have so much more options now for music and entertainment and news and information. There's Spotify, there's Pandora, there's other streaming services, iTunes, whatever it may be. There's an app for everything. You want local news, bang, you got an app for that. You want regional news, you got an app for that. National news, world news, weather, it doesn't matter. So I think the industry, the radio industry, I think has taken a hit. I think continues to take a hit. Radio stations across the country, with the exception, I'm sure, of a few here and there in different markets, but in general, they're not really thriving. Mm-hmm. They're trying to find different ways of generating some non-traditional revenue. Sales is not what it was 10, 15 years ago for advertising.
Sounds oddly like newspapers.
Yes. How, and I asked you the last time you were here, how's the general health of newsprint? You have said before that being an editor, being a writer, being a reporter, for print media is one of the most important jobs in the world.
It is, without question. I mean, I still believe, I believe that, and this is probably my last journalism job, but I sincerely believe that journalists and journalism right now is more important than ever before, especially when we're constantly being thrown aside as making up news and not providing vetted content when it's absolutely contrary to that. And people, I think, JD, that people don't know what to believe, and that you need to have news sources who are willing to stand up and put their stamp of approval on something and say, these are the facts, this is the information that you need to know to make educated decisions. And
you've said before, the clearinghouse of information.
Yeah, I mean, and
with fake news being
it's like the Wild West out there. Anybody, any jerk at this point who wants to call themselves a news aggregator or a news gatherer can do that. The technology is there. You can just set up a WordPress account and pretend that you are all that in a bag of beans, but you're not. You need people who are going to actually check the facts and check the sourcing and stand by that work and put their name on it and say that this is a valuable contribution. And just throwing an opinion out there and saying that's fact, and that's where it's getting really dicey, is people can't differentiate anymore between what's an opinion and what's a fact.
Wow. Yeah, I remember you said that last time. Are small town newspapers, are they a trusted source? Are they still a trusted source? If so, why? And are they the last of the Mohicans?
No. Journalism has been adapting for 200 years, and the print product is probably going away, but there will still be online publications. The most expensive thing that we do is putting ink on paper and then distributing that paper to the far reaches, the ends of the roads around Vermont.
Sure.
That's very expensive to do.
Yeah.
If you take those costs away, you can have a very healthy, strong newsroom full of talented people.
Yes.
Collecting even more information.
Sure.
But when your choices are gathering news and distributing news and printing news, and those costs are all about even, and you're constantly shrinking and shrinking and shrinking
Sure.
to do that, you can't be as effective. The first part of your question was, is local news, does it still essentially play a role? I will tell you that every small town newspaper in America will continue to do well, because the advertising money may not be coming in as much as it was before, and the subscriber base may not be in print. It may be changing to a digital format, but people still want to know what's going on in their community, and you need to have, as you used the word, clearinghouse. You need to have somebody who is that one-stop shop, where all that information is going, being checked, and being disseminated.
Sure.
And that it's not just, people think that Facebook plays the same role as a newspaper, but it doesn't. People transpose dates. They're not checking the information. They're just throwing it out there, and they're sharing it. Well, there's a big difference between sharing information and actually putting facts and putting valid information out that, you want people. It's based on integrity. It's based on trust. And, newspapers are the public trust. And you have to have somebody who is in that clearinghouse role, making sure that what is being presented is vetted. And that's what the added value of journalism is.
Sure.
So I think that small town newspapers will continue. They'll sustain. It's the big guys, the New York Times and the Washington Post, that want to have kind of arms all over the world and be able to cover the globe. That model is so kind of archaic at this point that they can't do it effectively anymore.
Sure. Right.
And if you look at the Boston Globe and the New York Times, they're starting to cover the boroughs in their neighborhoods more again, because that's the information that people want. They want to have that connection to community.
Sure.
And that's what newspapers do.
Isn't it funny how technology has affected both of our industries, and we've welcomed this, at least in radio, we've welcomed a technology that would allow us to do more with fewer people, still have a presence on the air with maybe less bodies. The consolidation in the field of radio has, in some markets, at some stations, has reached the point of absurdity. I mean, we're talking serious skeleton staff.
Yeah, nobody there.
And nobody there, lights off, building locked. I mean, Froggy, Frank FM, Jake Street, that's the case up there. This is the reality. We're bringing in syndicated programming that is out of market, not even in the same state, or we're bringing in pre-recorded, voice-tracked disc jockeys out of market, different state, and in the case of Froggy, pre-recorded a day in advance.
Right.
So there's fewer and fewer really live disc jockeys that are on the air.
Right.
And the technology has been brought into the industry to help us, but it's impacting the whole industry, and in some cases, losing the sharpness of the edge of being connected to the community.
Well, that's what I was just going to say, is what you're talking about there is a loss of community, because you're no longer in the ring of the community. You're an outsider trying to pretend to be, and people know the difference, and people don't like it.
They do know the difference. They most certainly do.
Yeah.
And Vermonters are finally really starting to catch on to it. I bump into people every single day that ask me, hey, who is that up on Froggy, or who are these buffoons on Frank FM in the morning? Where are they? But I'll tell you right now, and we were talking about floods last time I had you in here, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but you remember well when Main Street has flooded, several floods, not just Irene, but the big one in May, which I think was 2011, but I'm not sure.
That's the one that took us out.
2011, the May one, when just outside the doors here of the studio that we're in right now was a lake right in front of Denty's. I mean, Beverage Baron, this whole
section
Mr.
of
Z's,
town.
the whole Mr. Z's intersection. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you right now, if something like that happens again, you're not going to be hearing about it on the local stations right here in Barrie unless someone drives up there and cuts into the pre-programmed programming and cuts in with information. Times have changed.
Yeah.
I was the last live morning disc jockey on that radio station, and it started with, and I know we got to get back to newsprint, but it started with technology pre-recording the night shift from like 7 p.m. until midnight, or midnight to 5 a.m. And then it went from like the afternoon drive from 3 p.m. until 7 p.m. was starting to get pre-recorded. We call it voice tracking, which is basically you're pre-recording it into a computer, your voice. And then it went from the midday shift from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m., which is the case here locally on those radio stations. And now, and then it went to the morning show, which is the last to be affected by pre-recording. There's nobody live anymore. I think my point that I'm trying to make is when you get a newspaper thrown on your doorstep, it's live. It's captured.
It's true, but it's also it's interesting you say that, because newspapers aren't really newspapers anymore. They're news organizations. Even a small one like mine. We can't just think about what we're producing for tomorrow's edition, because we're competing now against social media. We're competing against other news organizations that are doing the same thing. So all of a sudden, when it used to be we wanted to have the best story for readers for the next day,
Right.
now we have to break news live.
Yeah.
Now we have to put everything we do through a rubric that says, well, what are we going to say on Facebook without giving away too much? What are we going to say on our website? What are we going to say on Twitter? And the last thing that we do is put out a print product.
Yeah.
It's the most expensive and the hardest thing to do, but it's the last thing we do, and it actually is time-stamped. It's when it's thrown on your doorstep the next morning, which feels like magic, right? You open the door and it's waiting for you, and you're like, wow, that's awesome. I'm going to go out and pick that up and go through my ritual. And you become dependent on that. And that's what we want you to feel like, that we're that indispensable.
Sure.
But that's the oldest news that you're getting from us.
Yes, I understand.
Isn't that weird?
It's funny. My mom's up at a local nursing home, Berry Gardens, and I don't know, a couple of months ago, something like that. Something was going on. Maybe it was the whole Mueller thing. I don't know. I can't remember. But whatever it was breaking news, and it was. I think it was coming over on Mom's TV on Fox, and I remember there was an old man in the hallway, and I said, "Did you hear what's happening? This is what's going on right now." And I had my phone in my hand, and I went, "What's going on right now? Get in your room and turn on your TV." And he had the paper. He had the Times-Argus, and he went just like this. "This is what I care about." And I'm like, no, you don't understand. But how do we make a younger crowd subscribe to the paper? How do we get a younger crowd to subscribe to the Times-Argus online to get their local news?
So we talk a lot about this, and the industry as a whole talks a lot about it. The only way you can do it now is it doesn't come down to civic engagement. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come down to news value. They want to see their name, and they want to see themselves. So how do you...
Or their son's soccer team.
No, you're talking about young people.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
That's the next generation of readers. The next generation of readers, I'll tell you a story. This is a true story. My daughter, who I adore, I love my daughter. I love all my kids.
You told this last time. I want you to tell it again. This is a great story.
No, I'm not going to tell it again.
No, you are.
She
I'm gonna
used
make
the
you.
newspaper as a prop at a job interview.
On LinkedIn.
And
wasn't it on LinkedIn?
She posted I can't remember where she posted the photo, but she had her laptop and her messenger bag, and she had the paper under her arm. And I couldn't believe it. I was dumbfounded.
How old is she?
23 now.
Okay.
Old enough to know better. Old enough to know that you dote on your dad a little bit, you know? And if it's not on Snapchat, if it's not on Instagram, if it's not, and how can you get news from those things? I mean, I'm not on Snapchat, but I know that a series of pictures of myself and other people will never convey news to me.
Sure.
I don't care enough.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that since the last time we talked, I've gone and talked to a few college classes. And one that was really notable, I was lamenting this very point. And one of the students raised his hand and said, you're actually the problem. And I said, that's probably true, but what do you mean? And he said, you and your generation, my parents, even my older brother and sisters, they feel like how I get information is a threat to them. And I was like, a threat? And he said, yeah, because it's not the way you all have gotten information for so long. He said, I bet you that on your device and a pile of books and a pile of newspapers, if you said, I need you to find out the latest on whatever it was, that everybody in this room could find that information faster than you just by wiggling their finger on a screen. Mm-hmm. And he said, the problem is that you don't like the way we get information, but we still get information. Mm-hmm. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. You know, and the way they digest information in scattershot, where our generation wants to sit with it and they want to stew on it. Now, does that mean that the next generation is kind of thinking about the world in the same way we do? Probably not.
Attention spans, brother. They're so short today. You know that.
I know, but you're falling into the same trap. Mm-hmm. You know, do you know that? Do you know that the attention span of somebody who, so these are college kids, they are paying money to be engaged, to be learning. I was in an event this weekend at Sterling College, and there were 250 people in this tent listening to, talking about food systems and talking about agribusiness and all these different things. Now, they were paying to be there. More than half of the people who were in that tent were young people. And they were young people who want to be farmers. They were young people who want to be professionals. And every time there was a break, they all pulled out their devices and were doing their thing, right? And they wanted to take selfies with the experts, and they wanted to do. And to me, it felt weird. It felt like, I was feeling emotionally drained by the whole experience. They were feeling invigorated by it. They were feeling, They were feeling like, even though they had this device in their hands, that they were making a connection. And that's all you and I are talking about is, the way we made connections with our audiences. It's a very linear approach. To kids today, it's a very vertical kind of, it feels spastic to us. Yeah. But they actually are getting information. And, we can say the attention span's shorter, but in a lot of ways, they have more access to information than you and I ever had.
Oh, no doubt.
They're literally carrying the world with them.
Yeah.
I used to have to read a damn book.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I
think they can process. I think we can, the younger crowd today can process information faster and then quickly shift gears to a whole nother story that's coming in and process that one at the same time.
Yeah. I think the problem is that social media and, most kids that we're talking about, the kids that we're worried about being the next listeners, the next readers that are not engaged, they'll figure it out. They like podcasting. They love podcasts. You're embracing what is really the next generation of interest to young people. Newspapers haven't quite figured out what that role is, because long form journalism's kind of gone away, and they're not interested in a 1,000-word story on a topic. Excuse me, they want the give me the highlights kind of a thing.
Of course.
But what's interesting about it is that that shift that we're seeing with young people is translating into, they understand their kind of role in it. It's the people who are using Facebook and the people who are trying to use Facebook as a tool to get points across. They're making it negative. They're making it polarizing. They think that their opinion actually has more weight than it does. And that level of social media that you and I are pretty much engaged in all the time is a cesspool. Think about the people who are just trolling the things that we say and do all the time, just for the sake of hating, just for the sake of being a jackass.
No doubt.
And that has become sport for a huge segment of the population.
Can be, yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's no longer about the facts. It's about your opinion's wrong, mine is right.
Sure. And feelings that are hurt, egos that are stroked, retaliation, bullying, It is. It's a cesspool at times. It can be, for sure, no doubt, where feelings, emotions just sit and fester.
Yeah. I mean, it's changed how we think about,
and it can create people to act on
or
whatever,
not act.
I
mean, that's the bigger
Right.
issue, is that people may feel really strongly about something and want to be able to voice that concern.
Sure.
But they're too scared to, because they don't want to be trolled by their friends.
Right, no doubt. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about you and your life. You grew up, you're living in the same home that you grew up in Plainfield. You were raised by your grandparents.
I was raised by my grandparents, and it was a great childhood. I mean, I was essentially an only child. My mother went off and was doing her thing. They had already raised 3 children on this farm in Plainfield. My grandfather was a failed farmer. He tried chicken farming and was so terrible at it, they ended up having to gas all of his chickens because they all got diseased. And he got saddled with a grain bill of $35,000 in the 1950s, which might as well have been $1 million. And so he read the law and passed the bar, and over decades ended up paying down that grain bill. That was his whole sole purpose at that point, was to provide for his family and to get that. He did not want to pass that on to anyone else.
Oh my God.
And my grandmother was quite ill with, she had rheumatic fever as a child, and so she had a very weak heart. She had a big heart, but she had a weak heart. And so while my grandparents raised me, I grew up around here in downtown Barrie, because his office was right here on Summer Street, and I went to lots of town offices with him to do research, and I went to court with him, and every once in a while I couldn't go to court with him, and I would get left to various people who would watch me. And my family was active in the church, and one of the folks who was active worked at the Times-Argus. So the former obituary editor of the Times-Argus used to let me hang out with him when I was a very young boy.
So we're talking 70s here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Early 70s, and I was always fascinated by the newspaper, the original Times-Argus building down. It was that one that was on North Main Street, but it looked completely different back then. And I kind of got bit by the bug and used to create my own newspapers at the house, and interview the dog, interview the cat, ridiculous things. And my grandfather encouraged it, and made copies for everybody in the family, and gave me my own little press. It was essentially like having my own little press.
And then you wanted to do a little. You wanted to be maybe a cartoonist, but you sucked at that. I mean, you're just not an artist, brother.
No, everything looks like a stick figure, because it is. You want a picture of your dog? It'll look just like a stick figure. Want a picture of the sun? It looks like a stick figure.
So then what happened? Shift the gears, Boy Scouts, and you interviewed somebody for Boys Life, right?
Yeah, I won a contest to. So when I first got into Boy Scouts, I put my name into a hat to do interviews of famous people, and I got to interview Gerald Ford.
Wow.
Yeah. I won a contest to do that, and I don't remember it very well.
Yeah.
It was very short. It was not a long thing.
Sure.
I don't remember really much about it, because I didn't really even know who. I mean, I did.
Yeah.
But I didn't.
Right.
Didn't understand the significance of it. Since then, ironically, I have interviewed 2 other presidents and understand the significance of that now.
Which ones?
Clinton and Bush 1.
All right.
So,
Wow.
Yeah. And, I was a reporter in Bath, Maine for years. Yes. And Bath, Maine is host to Bath Ironworks, which is the largest private employer in the state of Maine. And it's where they build the Navy destroyers.
Sure.
At that point, it was the Arleigh Burke class of destroyers. So you were constantly dealing with the locals, the unions, all those folks. But then you were also dealing with the U.S. Navy, and you're also dealing with people who are experts in shipbuilding. So all of us, as a young man, I had to become very quickly versed in the dynamics of unions, defense contracts.
Quickly.
Very quickly.
And you were in college, University of Maine, was it?
I went to the University of Maine.
Journalism.
Yep. That's the reason I went, was they had a daily newspaper there.
Okay.
And they don't have a daily newspaper there anymore because of me.
Yeah. So what happened? You stirred the shit up big time.
You said a bad word. I thought we were going to try and avoid the bad words.
You really raised some havoc over there and went head to head with some guy by the name of Stephen King.
Yeah. So
what happened?
We're going way out of order here. But
that's all right. You grab the wheel and take it any time you want, my man.
So
we don't have to go down that road.
Let's just quickly connect the dots.
Sure, yeah.
I was in high school, was the editor of my high school newspaper.
Yes.
Went to the University of Maine because they had a daily newspaper and a journalism program there. While I was in school there, I became the editor of the newspaper on campus.
Okay. Which high school?
I ended up going to Woodstock.
Okay,
I lived with family down in Woodstock for my high school years.
Okay.
But went to Maine, and with the sole purpose of wanting to get a degree in journalism. I had applied to other schools but couldn't afford to get into them. So, and I wasn't going to go to my state school.
Why?
Because it's UVM.
Okay.
So I went to somebody else's state school instead.
Understand. And
I got to go to UMaine for UVM's price because UVM didn't offer a journalism program.
Ah, interesting.
Which was a beautiful thing because I left school without any school debt. None. It was like I paid it off in less than a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So those good old days are gone.
They are long gone.
Yeah. So while I was at the University of Maine and was the editor of the paper, it was a daily. It was 5 days a week and student run. That's a lot of work, especially if you're trying to be in school. And it was a tab. Came out. It was usually anywhere from 8 to 16 pages a day. And it had everything, they covered sports and they covered arts and it had cartoons and it had a horoscope and it had news and it had an editorial page. It had all the things that newspapers have. It was just produced by students. And that was too much. It sucked. I mean, it was way too much work for what it needed to be. And it had been a daily for years and years. And I was the guy. People still talk about it to this day at the University of Maine. We used to have a daily newspaper here.
But Steve Pappas screwed it up.
Yep. And I took it back to 3 days a week. And then from there, it scaled back even more. So now it only comes out twice a week. And for a while, it only came out for once a week, but then they bumped it back up.
How'd you screw it up?
How did I screw it up?
Yeah.
By taking it from being a daily down to 3 days a week. People did not take kindly to breaking that tradition.
Okay.
So while I was there, while I was at school, we ended up wanting to produce a book of columns of people who had gone through the University of Maine, who went on to be notable folk and notable writers. And there were a handful of celebrities that were on television, but then there were some notable people who had attended the school back in the day, like early 1900s and earlier. And we found their old writings, and we were going to compile them into the book. Well, one of those writers was Stephen King, who had a column called The Garbage Truck in the Daily Maine campus, which was the name of the newspaper. And he was writing at the time about the peace movement, and he was very anti-war. And his columns were very pointed and often pointed against the administration of the school, and he was a real rabble-rouser at the time. And that property belongs to the University of Maine, because the University of Maine was the publisher of the main campus, the newspaper. And his attorneys stepped in and said, nope, you can't do that because his name is copyrighted. Now, his name at the time on his columns was Steve King, not Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
It was Steve King, S-T-E-V-E, not S-T-E-P-H-E-N.
Mm-hmm.
And we got an attorney who challenged that and said, no, you actually don't own this. The University of Maine owns it. So at the same time that this was happening, the University of Maine was starting to go through budget cuts because funding just wasn't there, that they were growing too quickly, you know, all those things that you hear about budget cuts in schools all the time. Well, Stephen King, who happens to live in Bangor, which is 15 miles from the University of Maine Orono, was quite a philanthropist and was often giving money to his alma mater.
Oh, boy.
And I was told to cut it out.
Oh, boy.
And
knowing you said,
well, so
not a chance.
So initially, when they told me to cut it out, they also got a cease and desist order and confiscated the computers we were using and the copies of the paper that had his column in it until it could be resolved. Well, we decided that we got a pro bono lawyer to say that we could take this. This was going to be a good fight. It was going to be a good copyright battle. And in the interim, I got fired. And I was told that if I was going to single-handedly compromise the fundraising for the University of Maine, that might not bode too well.
Oh,
and
my God.
So I was basically pressured to back off, and I backed off for an evening, and then the next day called a press conference and told the world what was going on and what was happening. And it was my first 15 minutes of fame was being all over every newspaper in the country for a student group suing Stephen King over the copyright of his own name. And well, that got me some attention, and all of a sudden newspapers all over the place wanted to hire me. So
interesting.
I finished up school and at that point was kind of focused on what was next, and there might have been a girl involved at the time too.
Sure.
So my attention shifted, and anybody who's interested in a good copyright battle, if you get a lawyer, you can still finish off what I did not.
Oh,
it's still out there.
Is it?
There's no way he owns those publications that he says he owns, and it's still sitting out there if anybody wants to take it up.
So you came back to Vermont?
Nope. I worked in Bath, Maine for several years and broke some pretty big stories there about some corruption
with Ironworks.
Yeah, they were challenging their tax abatement. They had filed for tax abatements and said that they had been overtaxed for years, and I was able to help prove that they were right. And it cost the city tens of millions of dollars. So I was a pretty popular guy.
Wow.
It also got the assessor fired, the city manager fired, and a handful of city councilors ended up having to resign.
You grew. That's where you probably grew your broad shoulders that you still have today.
Or my foolishness and my impetuousness.
Did you get the air let out of your tires at all?
I got windows in my car were smashed. I got, tires were slashed. Had stereo taken out of my car. Got some pretty. I got some threats.
So safe to say that you don't vacation in northern Maine.
In that part's called Mid-Coast, Maine.
Mid-Coast.
I still have great friends there. I miss it. I actually wrote I took the events of that and some interesting people who I met there, and I actually turned it into a novel. And then I never published it, but I wrote about that whole experience I wrote it as fiction. And it's actually a pretty good story. If I ever got my butt in gear, and I had an agent, I had an editor, and again, at that point I had a family, so I was like, I'll just put it in the drawer, I'll come back to it. It's been a lot of years. It's been 23 years because it was Jane. It's been 23 years. It's still in the drawer. But I digress. From Bath, I went to Concord, New Hampshire, where I was an editor at the Concord Monitor for 8 years. And Concord and the Monitor at that point was one of the lightning rods for presidential candidates. So between the connection in Bath with the Ironworks and dignitaries coming through all the time to inspect and be there for christenings and all of that, and being in Concord, I got to see, I have pictures of me posing with just about every candidate at the time, and met some amazing people and had some amazing experiences in Concord as an editor at that point, not as a reporter. And then went back to Maine briefly and helped run a couple of copy desks in Maine, and then ended up back here, basically to be closer to my grandfather, who was failing in health at that point.
In Plainfield.
Yep. And I took a job at the Rutland Herald so that I could be close by. Then I moved back up here. I took a job as a reporter again, and I worked in the press bureau in Montpelier. Sue Allen hired me, and
I remember Sue Allen.
Yeah, and I moved back here, and 2 weeks after I moved back, he died. And I've been here ever since, living in the house I grew up in.
And this is the last stop on the train, maybe, for Mr. Pappas?
For the journalism? God, I hope so. I'm tired. I mean, look at the bags under my eyes, man. Look at all this gray. I used to be a good-looking guy. Now I just look like I just walked in off the tracks.
What a story that is. So you're here in Vermont. Can we talk about what happened in your life through high school, if we can go back? You said you were raised by your grandparents, but you ended up living with some family in Woodstock, and that didn't go well.
Yeah. So what you're referencing is I have disclosed in recent years that part of what was going on at that time was I had mentioned that I had this affinity for the Boy Scouts, and I didn't really get along. I couldn't relate to the family members that I was living with
in Woodstock.
Yeah, and but I had great friends, and I had a wonderful network of friends who came from very stable families, and I made a conscious decision at the time that I just was not going to spend as much time at home with these folks, and so I didn't, and I made myself scarce. And part of that making myself scarce was essentially, if you were to classify it today, I chose to be homeless. I chose to be a couch surfer. I chose to use the equipment that I had access to through Boy Scouts, because I was the quartermaster for the troop, and it was Woodstock. So the equipment was nice. It was state of the art. And a lot of money had come into the troop, and there were nice sleeping bags and nice tents, and I was a runner, and so I would run and I would scout out these places, these locales where I could essentially camp, and I did that a lot.
Running, jogging, exercise. So you were scoping out places where you could
put up a tent,
live inconspicuously,
out of sight, and not be a bother to anybody, and through scouting, I actually got to help decide where we were going to build certain lean-tos for the troop. And I was essentially building my own network of, helping to build my own network of places to stay. And what came out of that is that even though I feel like it turned out okay and I graduated, in the top part of my class, is that I did end up deceiving a lot of people into this ruse. I mean, I was not truthful with people about what I was doing.
Well, that's all part of being a survivalist, I think.
Yeah, but it was, so I look back on it now, and now that I have my own children who, have their own struggles, I think about how I hope that they never get to a point where they would ever want to make those same decisions, because it was self-inflicted. And that's why I've never really talked about it a lot, because
Understand.
I didn't have to be in that situation. It's not like I was being abused. It's not like I was,
Sure.
In any kind of harm's way, other than I was stubborn, and I didn't, I wanted to create my own, kind of, and I got addicted to it. I really enjoyed
Being independent.
And being,
Sure.
and figuring it out and being a problem solver and, all of those things that came with that. But
this was all through high school. So
yeah, it was for about 2 years of high school. And then the music stopped playing one day when I was actually at the home of the superintendent of schools. Were
you friends with his son?
Yeah, he and I were classmates. And I would go over there and do, as part of my routine, as part of, I would go and hang out and do homework at their house, because I knew that there was a big dinner coming, and, I would eat well, and it would be good. And this was in the fall of that year. It was my senior year, and he called me aside and said, "How are your parents? And, how are your folks?" And I was like, "I don't know, yeah." And I couldn't really answer the question, because I knew that he knew that the mail wasn't going anywhere, and somebody had kind of
smart man
called me out. And he said, "Look, if your family's moved away, then you need to either go to the school district where they are, or you need to come up with another arrangement." And he ended up offering me an opportunity to live there at their home with them. And
rent free?
No.
But he wanted to offer it to you rent free.
He wanted me to just come and live there, and I insisted on not doing that. And I had a job, and I again, stubborn, I said, "No, I'll pay rent and, follow house rules and do chores and, earn my keep." And I did. And when I graduated from high school that year.
Which school?
Woodstock.
Okay.
Where he was the superintendent of schools. It wasn't like, it's not like I could skip school. I was living with the guy,
Sure.
And, but at the end of the school year, when we were, after we had graduated, he handed me an envelope, and it had every penny that I had given to him as rent. He gave me every penny back, and wished me well.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy he was. He was a classy.
Is he still around?
No, he died. He actually died the next year. He had ended up developing some form of very aggressive cancer, and I remember coming home from college to attend his funeral. It was the first funeral I'd ever seen with military honors. It was in the Catholic Church in Woodstock, and it was one of those funerals with the bagpipers.
Sure.
Oh.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh.
Oh,
Wept like a baby.
Sure. You still friends with his son?
Yep. We still stay in touch.
Wow.
Yep. And actually, all those friends from Scouts, I count among my closest friends.
Winters in Vermont are a little harsh, brother.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you sleep on those ridiculously cold nights?
Yeah, that's when couch surfing came into play, and I got into a network of, I was tutoring different kids and things so that I could be in a warm place for as long as possible. And I got to a point where I could time it where, it would be late and I'd say, is it okay if I do some homework before I go? And then I'd be like, hey, is it okay if I just crash on the couch?
Sure. But you ended up in a church and
well, that's where we stored. Yeah. So we stored the scouting equipment in the church
basement.
Yeah. In this little room it was in the rectory of the basement of the church, and this little room, and it was the perfect place to sleep.
But you got busted a few times.
Yep, I did.
By the police?
Somebody called the police. They were searching. I left a lock open on the back door, and they came down and found me.
What'd they say?
Well, get out, the ID and all that stuff. And I was asked to leave, but they told the priest, who basically offered me shelter not in a creepy way. I mean, it was like he gave me other options and was helpful. But yes, I did get caught a few times.
But that created a strong sense of respect, I guess, for law enforcement that you still carry with you today. You've got that in your back pocket.
They were very kind to me. They didn't just drag me out.
Might be different today. Might be.
Depends. Yeah. I mean, some of my closest friends are police. And I think a lot of them are I think it's still an honorable profession and a very dangerous one. And so I do have a respect for law enforcement, and they gave me, in that particular patch of my life, they gave me some pretty significant breaks that I probably should have. I was trespassing. I was I was, whether you call it trespassing or loitering or.
But you were, in the end, you were able to graduate from high school, go to college, and that's what propelled your life from that point.
Yeah.
But you have a remarkable sense of wisdom of what you've experienced.
Wow. Well, I've had a lot of time. Again, when you have your own children, as you know, you think about all the stupid things you did when you were younger, and you pray to God that Lily's not going to do the same dumb things that you did, right?
Sure.
At least you hope not, or at least a fraction of them.
True.
So I think I've thought a lot about, what I thought about most, JD, is I've thought about all the lies I had to tell to make all that happen.
To survive. Yeah.
But again, yes, to survive, but of my own choice. It was my own pride that was driving that. So I was telling lies pretty much for the sake of telling lies, because it was my pride and my ego I didn't have to put myself in those situations, and did.
Sure.
So I think a lot about that. I think a lot about how you make choices based on what you think is, going to move you to the best place. I'm not sure that those were the best decisions I could have made. And I think that I was able to turn it around because of fortune and being around good people.
You had good people.
Yeah. And I think that I've been able to, kind of glom on to good people my whole life. And I know what that those traits are that you're talking about. I know I can see that in other people, and I can try and mimic that or project it myself, but not without a lot of time of making some really bad decisions.
Sure.
Really bad.
And with that said, and we only have a minute or so left here, but homelessness in everywhere across the nation is huge right now. Here in the Granite City, we have our own problems, which you can point many fingers in many different directions as to multiple sources of what they are. But we continue to have a homeless population and a homeless problem.
Yeah,
that might even be growing.
Well, and I think that all of the things that I went through as a young person and the help that I got and the things that I saw have helped foster my feeling of how important community is and how important the role of a newspaper and being able to highlight the things in a community that role that I serve now of being an advocate for all of those things is more important than ever.
Sure. You may not agree with everything that's always published in the Times-Argus or the Rutland Herald, but it is a newspaper that continues to thrive, continues to live on, will for many years to come.
God willing.
God willing. It's a plastic table, by the way. But you've done an outstanding... How many years have you been with the Times-Argus?
So I'm now the longest-serving editor of the Times-Argus at 11 years, but I've been with the company for 13.
Wow. I love coming into your office and seeing the operation in there. And I'll tell you, if anyone's ever curious and they want to get a tour, show your kids what a newspaper looks like and arrange for maybe a quick walkthrough of a remarkable building, which is above the Cornerstone restaurant.
Yeah. There's no presses. On April Fool's this year,
yeah,
I posted a picture of the presses lined up in the parking lot as they were just before they were being hauled away, and I said that we were going to do a special run of the paper in the parking lot, and people actually wanted to know, like people who know me.
Yeah.
Like, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
What time is it going to start?
You have an outstanding staff, a great newspaper still, and I can only wait till I have you back on here again, and I hope you'll come in.
Yeah. I'm good for filling space.
That's Steve Pappas of the Rutland Herald and Times-Argus this time around on Aired Out. Thank you so much for subscribing. Make sure to post your comments, like and share, and tell your friends and neighbors about it. It's Aired Out. We'll catch you next week.